Welcome to the Brevard News Focus. Our focus today is on the Brevard County Fire and Rescue and their plight. And this is going to be segment one. Be sure as we come into this podcast to be careful about some of the topics that we're going to be discussing are graphic in nature and viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to our Brevard News Focus, and our guest today is Mike Bramson, president of the Brevard County Professional Firefighters, Local 2969, as well as his cohort, Ryan McLaren, who is a 10-year veteran, and he is a representative of District 40 for the Brevard County Professional Firefighters. Guys, welcome. We're going to be talking about the plight of the Brevard County Fire and Rescue, and they've been hemorrhaging a lot of employees lately, a lot of them in the field, and a lot of these is due to retirements, paramedics, and people who do essential functions. And we want to talk about that because it's very important as to what will happen to you in Brevard County, and we want you to be informed about why this is important to you and why you should take this serious. Welcome, guys.
Thank
And
you, Kevin. Thank you.
wanted to introduce also our co-host, of course, Katie Delaney, and so welcome all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to start first, and I want to talk about unions because there's been a paradigm shift in unions and how people see unions. Ironically, now you've had unions that actually are supporting both parties in a lot of ways, right? Tell me, where do you see the unions at? And that's been a problem with people in the past.
Yes, so unions is something that's going to be a lot of definitions, Kevin. So what you got to look at is what's called a right to work state, which is basically not what people say is the right to fire. It basically gives the people the opportunity to join or not to join, and if you do or do not pay the dues, you still benefit from what's called a collective bargaining agreement, a CBA. That's the contract. And we are a collective bargaining unit. That's a better description than the word union. And so what that gives us the opportunity to do is we are allowed to, through understandings of organizations such as Public Employee Relations Committee, to allow us to negotiate through a set of rules and sometimes Florida state statutes on the terms and conditions of employment. And there are mandatory and permissible items inside that contract for negotiations. And then there's some things that are just management rights or certain things that has to happen. Like we're essential functions and we don't have the right to strike. So when you look at unions and you look at the landscape of the United States of America and you talk about the words union, it doesn't mean the same in every state or for public and private employees and so forth and so on. So that's the first thing that we have to identify. The other aspect is 100%. You saw it in 2016. You definitely saw it a lot of conversations in 2020, and it's been a hot topic for 2024 with the term endorsement and what that means and what does that imply and where does that put us in our membership. What does it do for the service of our membership? They pay the dues, they have a voice, they want a voice, and that goes through that union, and that's through the political endorsement. And there's a huge paradigm shift on that, and I think that is respectful to what people want to do for the people who work. I hate to use this term. I don't know of another term. Please interject if you have a better term. But when you get into the blue collar workers, the people who do those type of things, the people who are essential functions, and I'm not talking about firefighters' essential functions. We knew that with the supply chains, essential functions to get products from point A to point B. We're dealing with those essential function product management supplies with North Carolina right now, trying to get waters and essential needs to people who are affected by these last hurricanes. And so then you get into blue collar workers, union workers, and how those type of work. And there's a huge shift on that, and it has more to do with job function than it has to do with lining the coffers of a union. And I think that's been going on since 2016.
So that's going across party line anymore. I mean, and so you're saying that both parties are actually have a different approach to for the lack of a better word, unions than they did before.
Absolutely. I think what you're looking at is presumptive support. You get into some of the places it was, you heard it, traditionally this is what unions did, traditionally this is, and there was some presumption of, oh, well, this is what I do, these are my stance on certain things, and those should give me union support. Well, the people who are supposed to be supporting those things aren't supporting those things.
Mhm.
And therefore, well, hold on a second. It's about the policies, it's about the topics, it's about the issues, not about the person, not about the party politics. It's about the issues and what's in the best interest of the greater good. And if you're not going to support the greater good, then you're not going to get literally the term union. And I think that's what, and it's been going on since 2016.
So now you guys are in negotiations with the county of Brevard, Brevard County, and you're kind of at an impasse. We'll come back to that point because we want to start first on the positive side of it. We want to look at why would someone put themselves through this job? You guys are treated like the morning trash. That's my personal opinion, and the way that you're treated. Why put yourself through this? And so the job itself, tell me about it. It's a demanding job, is it not?
It is. It is. To use a cliche, it's a calling. You know, it's a calling to serve the greater good of the public. Everybody has their individual reason on why they want to do the job. It is too easy to summarize this is what you want to do, and I don't want to go into pulp culture and use movies or whatever you want to think about it. In the idea of public safety, public service, firefighting, paramedicine, EMS, it really boils down to probably something that happened in their life or an experience. Paramilitary, we have a lot of military people that says, I just want that structure, I want to move forward. The other aspects of it is it's a cool job. I mean, you get to do things.
So what is the coolest thing? Is it hearing the siren?
No. I mean,
No,
it's
is it,
probably the
what is
coolest thing to hear the sirens and to see the lights when we go do like our public educations. We visit the schools and we see the elementary kids and all those type of people come out. That's probably the coolest thing. But when you get into it and you get in the muscle memory and everybody talks about the smells and everybody knows that you smell
Yeah.
pumpkin spice. I know what time of year it is. For us, I would say that for now they may change the way that our fire trucks work, but right now they run off diesel. And I would say that when you hear the certain diesel and you hear certain things, that puts you in a certain level of recognition of what you're about to do.
So I grew up, and one of the things that was really a big show on television during that time was Emergency, and I actually dreamed of being a firefighter. Didn't make it. Something took me off of that course, but it was watching those guys. I was just captivated by the calls that they had and the things that they went through. So, I mean, did that affect you, Ryan? I mean, did those? I mean, is it something that you saw? Was it something that you heard? What got you into it?
Well, it's funny you bring up Emergency and shows like that. There's not a lot that's accurate on them, but the one thing they all tend to get right is in this profession you have the equipment and training to uniquely affect the outcome of a bad situation and make it either less bad or even potentially good. So that just the idea that I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I was bouncing around between a few different things. Was at UCF at the time. Wasn't really thrilled with where I was going with it, but I also didn't want to tap out when I didn't have another game plan.
But
And
it has to be something that, so it's got to be kind of a calling, right? Because you guys are, and we're going to see that you go into a lot of situations, go through a lot of training, you experience a lot of situations, some of them very tragic. I mean, it has to be a calling, right?
I didn't know it was a
Do that.
paid. I didn't know it was a paid career. Honestly, for a long time.
Okay. So it's something that you would
It was
do.
something I wanted. It was something I wanted to look into doing as a volunteer. I didn't realize the depth of it and where you could go with it. And when all that kind of clicked, it became a no-brainer. Changed everything up. Took a little bit of sell. My parents were on board with it after the initial. Oh, you don't want to continue doing it? No. This is what I want to do. Okay, cool. And then they got behind it and haven't looked back. Don't think I'd change it for anything in the world.
So is it a high? I mean, you save someone's life, someone you have to perform CPR on. I mean, what does it feel like?
It's an immediate relief for me, anyways. Where okay, you're going from oh crap to oh good in seconds sometimes, and then if it's not, you're still trying, but it's just being able to impact something. Words are kind of hard for it.
So do you need that motivation in order to actually endure the kind of training that you go through? So Brevard County has a reputation of a lot of things, and the training is one of the most intense trainings that probably in the state. Would that be correct?
we have very dedicated company officers who really care about what their crews know. So you make it through your orientation has just begun. As soon as you hit the field, you're paired with the crew, and you are going to continue learning. And we have a lot of people, Mike being one of them, who really you, Mike, who will keep training you. And if you're not there, he's not going to push you along. You're not there yet. You're going to keep getting work done until you get there. That's one of the things I miss the most about being in the field, because I'm a fire inspector now, but the training was frequent and awesome.
So why the intensity, Mike, of training? I mean, why do you have to be so intense?
Well, intense is a good word. What you're trying to create is you're trying to put people in a situation to see how they react. And some people are going to have, and they're always going to go down to the muscle memory of what is their routine. And you go through repetition to create that muscle memory so that when you're in those bad calls and you're in a situation that is abnormal, which is very, very infrequent. You have low frequency, high risk, high reward situations. How are you going to react? But there's only one way to find that out, and that's through training. That's through accountability and moving forward on that. I think what you're looking at Brevard County, and I've been here for 22 years, what you're looking at is the dedication on certain aspects of it, the necessity of making sure that we have that training in place because we have a certain standard that we need to provide, and the term is doing more with less in certain aspects, and things have waxed and waned, and we've had a lot of things go through Brevard County. What it boils down to at the end of the day is the ability to trust the fact that someone will act in the best interest of what that job function is. And some people have skill sets, some people have great skill sets, some people have skill sets that we build, and some people come to the table and says, hey, this person knows how to weld, this person knows how to use chainsaws. And what happens recently, and I'm going to use this now, and hopefully we don't talk about this again, but when you talk about the generational gap, it is so obvious in our field because fire departments and what we do, because it's just a jack of all trades. We've relied so much of people who were in a particular part of the world of the job market would do our job. They came turning wrenches. They came out of this. And I'm talking 20, 30 years ago. You get into the world where it's not a calling specifically for this. It became a professional job out of necessity.
So do you have to be a MacGyver?
We try to train toward MacGyver, and I don't know if your viewers know what that is, but
MacGyver was a jack of all trades.
Absolutely,
you could do whatever,
absolutely.
Right?
I would say that you don't have to be a particular jack of all trades. What you have to have is you have to have the company officer that Ryan was talking about to identify the strengths and weaknesses of everybody and create a MacGyver out of the 5 people on scene. You have a diversity of what you need to do. Why I say it that way is, in my career, I'm a little bit on the short side. So you have a problem and you have to get into an attic or you have to get in a car in a ditch. You're not going to send the 6'4" person into the attic. You're going to send your 5'6" person. So you have to use your resources, allocate those resources, and use them to the best of their ability. So the jack of all trades, or the MacGyver, is over the span of the company, not the individual. And to make that a unison, to create a company or a crew, and then allow those people to work together, is trust. Each person looks left and right. It's a paramedical organization, but we don't accept casualties. You all have an acceptable plan that everybody goes in and everybody comes out.
So now, one of the things that you train on, and it's hard to replicate, you have to do it, is to have live action with a fire.
Yeah, we in Brevard County we do live burns. Yes,
but that's not standard across the state of Florida.
COVID created a lot of problems, and let's take COVID out for the sake of time. You have, what we do is we try to simulate the best situation we can in Brevard County using certain live fires, with great training personnel, with the people in the field working closely with the new hires, and then revisiting those training and revisiting those fires throughout your career. It says, here's new techniques, new ideas. We're burning things hotter and faster. We have a couple other ideas. And sometimes, every once in a while, someone gets a great idea and says, hey, here's a great idea. Why don't we do this in the fire service? And it changes the way we do things. So we have to relearn certain things. Well, one thing firefighters hate is change. The other thing they hate is the way things are. Mm-hmm. So you have a cultural thing to overcome. And we're going to talk a lot about culture, I expect, over the course of these series of interviews. And so in Brevard County, we've always prided ourselves that we put these things together. And we put it together in unison. And the best example for that is what we do every once in a while. Unfortunately, they're kind of politically in nature. We do a fire ops. That fire ops is the opportunity for us to show certain people, usually policymakers, it's open to the public, usually the press, but we like to give a show and tell to people. Not the show and tell we show kids, but we show and tell the inside workings of our fire trucks, our ambulances, our ladder trucks, how it's like to go to a brush fire, what it's like when someone calls for an emergency. And we do it every 2 to 3 years. We had one this past cycle, and we try to show people to do what we do.
But you can't show them. So walk me through what it's like, and you experienced this. What is it like to walk into a live fire? So you have to train on that in order for people to know or to experience that, so that when they actually experience that, they know what's going on, right? So what is that like?
Well, to start off with the cliche is we go into a building while the rats and cockroaches are running out. So right off the bat,
That would be me.
and it
I
should
would
be
be
everybody.
running out.
It should be everybody. So we can use a lot of similarities to a lot of things, but let's talk about what we do when you talk about there's a fire. What we do is we start off with the pre-plans. We start off with community outreach. We start off with getting into communities. We start out with our policymakers and our people, and the people like what we're doing right now. We're educating people and telling people that we need to have smoke detectors. October was a fire awareness type of situation. We go to the schools and we tell the kids, stop, drop, and roll. We still do that. In the wildland fire setting, we have Smokey the Bear that says fire, and when it's really dry, we do those type of things. We start off with awareness. We start off with the opportunity with 911. Call 911, this is what you need to do. And we start off with the fact that we go to commercial buildings and we have little map books and we say, this is what could happen. And when things work through training, that's the best case scenario. So we are pre-programmed that hopefully brings down a little bit of the anxiety, makes everybody understands what their assignment's going to be, and then we come in. We get the call, 911, you come, you show up. The first thing you do is you identify that, hey, it's a fire, because we have a lot of false starts. Once you identify the fire, you take a step back, and then you have to allocate resources. How many fire trucks, how many people, how much water, what's the outcome, are there any people trapped? You have a checklist, and I'm not going to go through the entire scenario because time. You show up, you start unfolding the call. We do this, we do that, I need this. We have I have a company officer, we put all these people, we put people at harm's way. I need you to do this, we need to do that, we need to get into the building. Hurricane season, are the shutters still up? We're going to cut the doors, we get in, and it's hot. So you're like, ooh, it's going to be hot in there. We have
So now
gear.
the gear, you're getting into that. Now,
Yeah.
The gear weighs how much?
Well, they got numbers all over the map. 45 pounds up to 90 pounds. It depends on what you're trying to say. Let's just say that it's heavy. You have the gear that prevents you to get thermal burns. Then you have abrasion resistance. Then you have your air pack. Then you have your mask. Then you have your helmet. And then you have to breathe the air. And you usually have, depending who you are, anywhere from 20 minutes to 40 minutes of breathing air. And then you have to get out of the structure because it's toxic. So you get on air, you do what you need to do, and then you need to get your tools, and then we break in the door, and then we walk in, and then we try to find the fire. And as we do so, we try to make sure that there are no cats, dogs, snakes, people, all that stuff. Watch your TV shows. All that stuff is, as Ryan was saying,
So what is it like when you walk into that?
dark.
So it's smoke,
Dark and hot.
hot, and as far as what?
Hot. Like,
One thing that I
Hot.
was really blown away by at Fire Ops when I was lucky enough to be able to go to Fire Ops this year. And one of the things that I learned was that pretty much from the sweat on their body, when they go into these fires, they get burns from their sweat
Wow.
in their uniforms, every fire that they go into.
You'll feel it
So-
pretty well around your ears, around the weak points of your gear are where your hood is your protection. So you feel it around your ears, you'll feel it along here. You'll know if something's not tucked perfectly in the right place because you'll have a nice weird shaped little burn like right there or something like that from it. But it is hot and it is dark, as Mike said. The heat you feel through the few points that aren't thick enoughly covered to do it, for lack of a better breakdown.
So what
It's
are you
hard to
thinking?
explain.
Are you just like a laser-like focus trying to get the job done when you're in that?
I would say to bring you into our world, and I had a mentor who always did that. He said, if you really want to get into the world of a firefighter, don the gear, come to my office, is put on the mask, click in, we call it clicking in, breathe the air, and come into my office, which liabilities we can't really do. I would say for the well-trained company officer, once you get over the hurdle of muscle memory and you get over the aspect that this is dangerous and potentially fatal. And I always tell my new hire, look, I don't want to die. I may be a little bit unorthodox on some of the things I say on a fire grounds. We're going to put things together and we're going to get the job done. The anxiety isn't the 80% of the known of what I'm trained to do. It's not going to be the 15% or 10% of the unknowns of is the power secure, is the fire in the attic, or those type of things. It's going to be those things that you come across and the unknowns and the anxiety of, I didn't expect. Probably the most drastic one to take the tone down a notch is going to be a child hiding in a closet. What happens when that occurs? What happens when you get on the radio and says, we're looking for X, Y, and Z? Those are the things that when you do your job and you hit the 80% mark and you're in the fire and you're putting the hose and you're doing the fire and you're doing the routine stuff, the back of your mind is, what if I get to the worst case scenario? What if I have a building collapse? It's never about the routine of the job. It's about those outliers that cost firefighters their lives or cost the citizens their lives.
So you're on high alert.
You're there to do a job. You're asking some fantastic questions, but it's hard to get you into our world because you got to think that first thing is we're in a place that we shouldn't be in. Mm-hmm. So you're in high alert, but you're not on high alert because it's on fire. You're not high alert because you're dragging hose or spraying gallons and gallons of water. You're on high alert because you're trying to expect the unexpected. Mm-hmm. And that is what we train, and that is the low frequency, high reward, high risk issue. Building collapse is huge problem for us. Trailers, fire getting underneath you, getting burned over, like those horror stories are what's in your mind, not the routine of going in there's a mattress on fire, put water on the fire, 200 gallons per minute. I mean, I can throw all the technical stuff out there. And that also is not interesting to people. We do the elementary school stuff. They look at the truck, they're like, oh cool, here's the hose. No, they want to see the extrication tools, the big loud tools. They want to see the axes. They want to see the things that they see in TV that we propagate as the cool part. The sirens, that's the stuff that's cool. The job that we actually do on the routine basis is exactly that, routine to a firefighter.
So can you replicate going into a burning building and experiencing? I mean, is there any way that you can replicate that in order to train someone? Have you seen firefighters go into a situation like that and not be able to handle it?
Yes.
How often?
Yeah.
Luckily, not very often, because they have to get to us, they have to go through fire school. So they get certified through the state of Florida through fire standards. So there's at least one hurdle. So when they come to us, but we elevate that. We take the fire standards and we take it to the Brevard standard. Sometimes that's up, sometimes that's down. We've had people that walked out and says, this isn't for me, and they cash in and they walk that line and they're done. But because of state statute, because of what we do, because of certain standards, when you go to a training fire, you have to do a walkthrough. There has to be standards. There has to be safeties. There's always instructors. I'm an instructor myself. You always know that no matter what, there's 3 or 4 other people that if something happens, you get overtaken by the heat, someone's going to pull you out of that building. You know that that building has doors that lead you out. You may go into a hoarder's house that doesn't have that access. So the level of training can only be the level of training. And then you hope that that training creates a muscle memory that gives them the skill set that when they get that first call, that they are able to rely on that training and then get into the practicality of the job.
So there's a lot that is there. You're depending on the unity of each one of the firefighters, that they're well trained, they have the muscle memory that you continue to say about, and so you're expecting that that person is going to be there for you to perform their function.
Yes.
And if they don't, there's trouble.
Luckily, that doesn't happen often.
Yeah.
So
walk me through when you go to a call, someone calls, and answer this first. When I was a kid, you didn't see a fire truck show up. And in fact, you hardly ever heard sirens, maybe once or twice a day, but now it's frequent. Why is that the case? Why are there more fire sirens or calls than ever before, it seems like?
that's actually a multifaceted question. Right now, call volume continues to increase. Of course, population density, population increases. There's a higher survivability of a lot of the things that people are suffering from today that happened even 20 years ago. So the first part of your aspect of your question is when you call 911, what happens? And you go through the chain of survivability and you reach a dispatcher and then the nature of the call. A lot of people know what that is. And we determine through certain parameters or what they call cards, hey, you meet X, Y, and Z. I ask you a question, you answer the question, you go to this card, you move things over. And I'm oversimplifying a dispatcher's job, but that's how it really kind of works. We put it in, there's a computer that gives certain suggestions on closest unit, all kinds of things go in there. But the human factor, of course, is the communication between the dispatcher and the caller. And we get into a certain aspect. Those calls could lead to something. Hey, my person fell in the kitchen. Okay, cool. We're going to go ahead and send a unit. Well, why are all these people here? They only fell. Did they fall? Why did they fall? What happens when they fell? There's so many more variables. So we always just assume the worst. The worst is always going to be cardiac arrest and medical
So you have
fire.
to assume the worst.
Have to. We have to because that's what the public expect. When they call 911, they expect the best service. The best service always lies in the fact that when you call, the expectation is, you talked about emergency, I want my Johnny Gage. I call 911, I expect that to be the most professional, highest, best service possible. And that means we are planning for all the contingencies. Those contingencies come from the toolbox of the fire truck, and they come with the ability to take us to the hospital if it's a medical call and an ambulance.
So walk me through who all goes, all of the individuals that are on the fire truck and the paramedics. How many people are involved in any individual call?
So for Brevard County, it varies. For Brevard County, we bring 5 people. Usually on a standard call, the standard of service, there's going to be 3 people on the fire truck, and there's going to be 2 people on, we call them rescues. So I'm going to use the word ambulance and rescues. I'm going to try to use the word rescue as often as possible for the firefighters and the people who work for Brevard County to respect them. But I also want to use the word ambulance for the layman people so they understand that that's going to be the unit that takes people to the hospital. That's what we need to do. So walking you through the idea, I'm going to use a very readily acceptable process called the chain of survivability. And it is applicable to anything that we do in our job. So to sum it down, the chain of survivability starts off with that preload information. You have the knowledge you need to know to call 911. So the bystander sees whatever they do and they says, hey, I'm going to do something. Sometimes the bystander happens to have a skill set. People see people in car accidents on the side of the highway all the time. You see the videos. They pull people out of a burning building. That's a bystander using their skill set. Sometimes a bystander starts CPR. Then from there, if they're trained or not trained, they move to the dispatch center, starting the mechanism. The dispatcher gets the information, they get whatever they do, they go into the computer, they read the cards depending on the call, and then that elevates to the next thing. That dispatcher then finds the most appropriate way to respond to that need, and then they bring that into the first responders. In the first responders, for our incidents, sometimes it could be a lifeguard in certain situations. Sometimes that lifeguard takes the place of the bystander. Sometimes it's the cities that don't transport to the hospital. Sometimes it could even be forestry if it's a fire in the woods. Katie's experienced that firsthand. Once we get to the first responder, the call unfolds to the next level, and then we've decided that we show up on scene, we have the radio work, and we've identified the needs, the resources, allocation of resources. Maybe we even go ahead and demobilize resources as we're too much. Then we get into what we're going to do, the intervention, the paramedic for medical calls, the fire, the company officers, allocation of resources, and then we elevate till we solve the problem. Once we solve the problem, we demobilize. In the ideas of medical calls in Brevard County, that's going to be called defined care. And that's going to determine, did they go to the hospital, determined by our protocol. In Brevard County, the uniqueness in Brevard County is that next step, the actual definitive care, is only provided for emergent care by Brevard County Fire Rescue. There is no other entity that will take a human being, sometimes animals. We have the ability to do dogs and all this stuff, but to take them to the next step. Brevard County Fire Rescue provides that service that takes them to the hospital with a handful of legal interlocal exceptions that I don't want to get into, but one of those exceptions happens to be something cool we talk about, which is the Aeromac. We can transfer someone to a helicopter, and that helicopter then provides those services to the next level. So it starts off small, it gets huge, and then it de-escalates.
So each of the 5 people that go to a call, they each have a specific responsibility, right? And that you're working as a team in each one of those calls. Would that be correct?
It is. It depends on the company. Yes. So generally speaking, everybody's going to have a skill set. Sometimes they overlap. So in certain cases, if you come up and you get to a garage and you need to force a garage, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 people to do it. So you have to allocate more resources. But the best example for using the skill set at best you can is going to be cardiac arrest. Someone has a heart attack. Heart attack being that their heart has stopped. We use what is called the pit crew method. And what happens is when you get to the call and we initially come up with those 5 people, 3 on the fire truck, 2 people on an ambulance, and sometimes this happens is, hey, someone had fallen in the bathroom and we can't get to this person. And you show up and the reason they fell in the bathroom and you can't open the door is because their heart has stopped. So if you just show up to say get them out of the bathroom, we didn't show up with the entire crew, you'd already be behind the 8 ball. And in our field, time is muscle, or time is heart, or time is brain. So we can immediately say, hey, we overshot a little bit, but we can go ahead and unfold this call and provide that services immediately. So what happens is in that situation, you're going to have one person who's going to be your coordinator. They make sure that, hey, we have resources. Do we need to have more resources? Do we need to do this? Do we need to do that? Then you're going to have someone who performs the CPR.
So they get on the scene and they're evaluating the situation, and then you're formulating a plan.
Right. The head coach, we call it the pit crew method, so that's going to be the coordinator. Then you have to have skill sets, understanding that in this situation, for instance, CPR, there is going to be a timeline for interventions because it's a muscle fatigue. You're doing CPR for 2, 4, 6 minutes. They're going to fatigue. And how do I move that on? Now, we have a Lucas device, an actual physical mechanical device that can perform that function. So I don't have to put a human being in there. We put a machine in there.
So how long do you perform CPR before you say this is not going to work?
Oh, that's impossible to talk about. You get
Yeah,
so many
different
variables.
scenarios.
You got it. That's why that coordinator, that's why you have to have a trained, experienced professional who knows to identify, should we do this, should we do that? You get into the young people, you get the protocol, that only tells you so much. You know, we're not at the point where the machine's going to, or the ghost in the machine's going to dictate care. The human being's going to make the call and says, can we do this, can we do that? Hey, I think we can solve this problem. I just need this other resource. Call on the radio, get those resources in.
And it's worked.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. We put this program in place. We've won awards in 2015, and we'll give credit where credit is due. We got into some of these things where some of the newer interventions coming into 2018 were counterintuitive. And some of these things you're like, hey, when we can do this, and we saw people walk into fire stations 3 days after they were basically something that were like whatever. And the best example for you, like I've said before, is 20 years ago we had this. It's going to sound morbid to the viewers, but we had this horrific protocol on if you had certain types of stroke events, we just didn't have the skill set, recognition, or ability to intervene. And some of these were like, we can't do anything for you, we're going to do supportive care. You fast forward to 20 years today, we're so aggressive to identifying. We have the knowledge, the ability that says, hey, I have the skill set. This is if we read this and we have these certain signs and symptoms, nothing interventional, just reading what's going on, talking to people, going through a protocol and saying they were presenting this way. We can say, hey, we need to get these people to this hospital. They're going to walk out of that hospital. Same exact event 20 years ago, we didn't even have the ability to acknowledge that you could survive this event. Today, we'll put you in an ambulance, we'll put you in a helicopter, we'll get you to where you need to be, and then those people are going to work their magic and do whatever they need to do, and you're going to walk out of that hospital.
You've had people come in, and what is that like when you get people who have come in and who've benefited from you guys saving their life when it looks like they didn't have any chance of being able to survive?
That's a great question. It all really matters on the individual level. So you're getting into some of the weeds on culture, and I knew we were going to come back, and I figured the tone of where we're going to be at is about culture. Every person deals with trauma in a certain way. You stress, stress, and so what happens is, even if it's a successful thing, sometimes cardiac arrests don't go the way you think. Sometimes this happens, sometimes it works. So each individual, it's not in the nature of the people who do our job to do anything more than their job. That's what we're paid to do. That's what we do. That's the calling, is to go in, to do this, save lives and properties, to come back, clean up the truck, clean up whatever you need to do the dishes, have a piece of ice cream, and then wait for the tones that we call the tones to drop, or for the sirens to go back and do it again. It's a fantastic celebration, especially when they bring their families. It is a great celebratory thing. Sometimes these things are done at the commissions. You have notes about a call, so I'll go ahead and volunteer this call. We had an incident, and I'm going to paraphrase for respect of the people that it happened to and the responders, But we had an event that had to unfold, and it was a lightning strike situation. And usually in lightning strikes, especially in certain cases, that they're generally going to be fatal. They're going to be hard calls to run. They're going to be in that top 5% on, hey, we're going to follow our protocol. We're going to do these things. We're going to identify the issues. But the mechanism is the problem. The ability to wrap your head around, how do I apply my knowledge, my skill set to something that happened? And in this case, all the people who were involved in the incident
So
survived.
this is on Merritt Island,
Yeah,
right?
it's in Merritt Island. All these people survived, and then there was an award ceremony. There were some things happened, and I do believe you'd have to look at public records to find it. But I do believe there was a celebratory thing at the commissioner chambers to do so, and rightfully so. More for the trauma of the event, not to celebrate the survivability of what the interventions are, because that's just what we do. But you got to think that this is one of those things that says this can't happen. You can be in Brevard County, you can do these things. Bad things can happen to great people, and there are resources, or we're trying to retain those resources. We're trying to make sure that the services that are expected by Brevard County are still available moving forward. And that's one example. And we can spend days unfolding all the wonderful things that happen. And I will tell you, in my career, I've seen intensity stuff. I've seen a lot of intensity stuff. A lot of the absurd things you see on TV are probably only half as absurd as what we see in real life. So, you want to say, hey, I saw this on TV. What do you think? We could probably parallel it to something we've actually done.
So you think the writers can't come up with the reality of what actually happens out on the road?
I think that if it was feasible to show people what happened, if you did like the Cops TV show, if you show people what you can't do because of HIPAA and laws and protecting
Right.
patients' rights, but half the things, not half, but I'd say 5 to 10% of stuff we do in the field, and you told the story to a regular person, it's a big fish story. And we do embellish. Now, firefighters will embellish. Like we battle the dragon. You're like, oh.
Yeah.
But I will say that a lot of the things that you do, you're like, it's unbelievable what firefighters, first responders, police officers across the board, and what those dispatchers have to hear on the phone, what those dispatchers have to deal with. Because I'm just going to take a little personal liberty here. In that model, you understand that as soon as that dispatcher's on the phone and they say something, and they're like, hey, what's going on? And it says, oh, I hear that the paramedics are here. Go ahead and hang up the phone with me and go ahead and tell the paramedics what's going on. That's the end of the conversation to that dispatcher. There is no follow-up. Now, sometimes we're trying to get a lot better, but that dispatcher doesn't know if there was a good outcome, a bad outcome, if there was more to it, all types of stuff. So you understand that everybody does part of their job, and they are a key component, a link in that chain. But the first link never knows what that third link does. The third link never knows what happens at the fifth link. The second link never finds out about the sixth link. So you also got to think that we have to put these things in compartments. And there comes the culture. I think pulp culture would call it dark humor. And that's why a lot of these things we just kind of...
So does that mean that you're unemotional?
I would just say that there are coping mechanisms that we train with, and only in the past, and we have some specialty people and the subject matter experts, but I would say only in the past 10 years have we really identified the psyche of the first responder, not just the first responder, and really taken apart what they have to go through and what they do and what they see. And I don't want to be morbid on camera on how I do our new hire lunches, but we have a speech, and every time someone comes in and they join the Brevard County family, since I've been involved at this level, we invite our new hires and we buy them lunch to have a conversation. And inside that conversation, we identify what they have joined up to do. And inside that conversation is, if you need help, call for help. PTSD and other components of PTSD is a real thing in the first responder world. There are things and levels of things that you don't know you can or may not be able to deal with. And in that aspect, I would say, yes, there's probably a piece of that is unemotional. Then on the other aspect, I will say it's hyper emotional. And that's on the individual basis. It's just how you're pre-wired.
Okay, we're going to end this segment right here, and then we'll come back in our next segment, and we're going to pick up on this issue of emotions and what's in the mind of a firefighter as they're going to a scene, and how does that affect them? And you want to hear about that. We'll be back.